Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington as President Trump kicks off his first major international trip of his second term as he looks to ink new deals and investments in the U.S. while also facing scrutiny over potential personal business conflicts. The president's Middle East itinerary notably includes 3 countries where the Trump organization has planned real estate projects and other business ties, starting in Saudi Arabia, where he was greeted in Riyadh by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as part of a lavish welcome ceremony. The 2 leaders then participated in a signing ceremony for a strategic economic partnership between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia on issues related to energy, defense, and health. The White House says that Saudi Arabia has also committed to invest $600 billion in the U.S., though the specific details remain a bit unclear. Speaking at an investment forum hosted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, President Trump praised the new generation of leaders transforming the Middle East.
Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence.
The president also had strong words for Iran, threatening, quote, maximum pressure if the ongoing nuclear talks fail. The president also seemed to open the door to diplomacy with Syria, but the president's trip has reignited concerns about conflicts of interest due to the Trump family's extensive and growing business ties to the region, which now include multiple Trump Organization real estate projects, the UAE's $2 billion investment in the president's crypto venture, Jared Kushner's investment firm that received at least $2 billion from a fund tied to the Saudi government, and the president's longstanding relationship with the Saudi-backed Live Gulf organization. Meanwhile, back here at home, the administration is facing pushback over its decision to accept a $400 million luxury jet from Qatar to be used as Air Force One. Some of those critics are members of his own party who are raising serious security concerns.
I think it's not going to pass the smell test, so I wouldn't do it. Qatar has a lot of...
Are you going to call on the president to change his mind?
Well, sure. I just said it right now. I don't think it's a good idea for him to do it.
Would it worry you if the president was flying on a plane that the Qatari government provided?
It would make me consider the appropriateness of that, yes.
Yeah. He seems to intend to use it for Air Force One. Do you have security concerns?
Well, they better sweep that plane from front to back.
Well, what I'm concerned is the safety of the president. I mean, Qatar's not, in my opinion, a great ally. I mean, they support Hamas. And so what I'm worried about is the safety of the president of the United States.
Joining me now, NBC's Garrett Haake. He's traveling with the president in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. NBC's Julie Serkins on Capitol Hill, and NBC's intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce joins me on set. Garrett, let's start with you. Thousands of miles away, President Trump, of course, a lifelong businessman. How is that shaping this trip, and what more do we know about the agreements and investments that were announced in Riyadh today?
Yeah, I'd say broadly speaking, Ryan, this trip is more about deals than it is about traditional diplomacy, although looking over the limited information that the White House has put out about the deals struck today or announced today by the president and the crown prince, it's not clear at all how they get to that $600 billion figure that the president was touting. The single biggest investment seems to be this $142 billion arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Other than that, it's a mix of smaller projects of Saudi data centers coming to the United States or U.S. goods or services being sold to Saudi Arabia. Some of these projects appear to be in different stages of development than others, but it is always the goal of this president to kind of pump up these investments. And remember, he did a similar thing during his first trip again to Saudi Arabia in his first term, where it was a baseline of $400 billion of investments that he said was the reason he came to Saudi Arabia first then. Today, it's $600 billion. At least that's the number they're talking about.
And do you get a sense that the White House is concerned at all about the optics of all these agreements, considering all the family business ties that the president has to that region?
Not at all. And I think that's a big difference between the first term and the second. You'll remember that in the first term, the president said with great fanfare that he wasn't going to conduct any foreign business dealings while he was in office, the Trump organization, he said, would hold off from doing so. Now there is no such prohibition. His two sons who work or run the Trump organization have been crisscrossing the globe, inking these deals, multiple development projects here in Saudi Arabia, a big golf course development in Qatar, several developments in Abu Dhabi and in other parts of the United Arab Emirates. The overall response from the White House seems to be that they say, and viewers and voters can look at this however they like, that these are separate entities between the Trump White House and the Trump organization, and that they're all doing this out in the open. And essentially, you can't be corrupt if you're making your business deals out in the open. I think there's a wide variety of responses to that general line from the White House, but that's how they view it. They're making no efforts to hide it, and they don't seem at all concerned with, the perception of a conflict of interest on these business deals or on the acceptance of that plane from Qatar.
And you mentioned the emphasis on deal making as opposed to diplomacy, but in his remarks to the investment forum, the president also addressed some of these diplomatic issues, like what's happening with Iran and in Syria. What stood out to you?
Well, what stood out to me was how, when he did talk about diplomacy, the positions were much more in line with the Saudi viewpoint than they have been with our more traditional ally in this region, which is Israel. The lifting of sanctions on the new Syrian government was kind of the biggest foreign policy announcement that the president made today. He said that he was asked directly to do that by the crown prince and by the president of Turkey, by the way, to give this new government in Syria a chance. That's a government that's viewed skeptically by Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that he would continue to hold out hope for the Abraham Accords, a normalization of relationships between Saudi Arabia and Israel, something that's not going to happen while the war in Gaza continues. And on Iran, where Saudi Arabia has had slightly improved relationships over the years, the president continues to say he wants a deal. He does not want to bomb he doesn't want to bomb Iran. He does not want to engage them militarily right now, if it can be avoided. He had a very salesman-like line basically saying the time is now to strike a deal, don't wait. But he continues to hold out the hope that there can be some kind of negotiated settlement with Iran. Again, all positions more in line with the Saudi viewpoint than the Israeli one.
Okay, Garrett Haake on the first day of the president's trip overseas. Garrett, we appreciate that. Let's move now to Capitol Hill, where Julie Sirkin is standing by. So, Julie, we mentioned one of the potential conflicts of interest getting a lot of attention on this trip for the president is that luxury jet that the Trump administration is preparing to take as a gift to the Trump administration from the Qatari government. What are Democrats doing right now to try and hold the administration accountable on this?
Well, Ryan, as you know well, Democrats don't control any part of government, so all they can really do is make a lot of noise about this. And that's exactly what they're doing. There are multiple non-binding resolutions floating around, one of them trying to reaffirm congressional approval, the power that Congress has in doing transactions like this. Of course, that falls to the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits any president from accepting foreign gifts without explicit approval from Congress. Democrats aren't going to be able to get anywhere on that unless they have support and buy-in from the other side of the aisle. You also have Leader Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, who said he will issue a hold, and he has, on political appointees, on nominees to the Department of Justice, kind of lower level people, nobody that would really cause a lot of concern or a lot of alarm up here. But other than that, there's really not much they can do. The question then becomes, what, if anything, will Republicans do? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, and let's expand on that a little bit, because as you point out, the Constitution prohibits government officials from accepting these type of gifts unless they get congressional approval. And you and I both talked to a lot of Republicans and Democrats over the past couple of days who seem to indicate that that would be the case. But is there any movement to actually make that happen? Could there be a vote? And if so, would Republicans approve it?
Well, Leader Thune, the Republican leader in the Senate, actually made some pretty interesting comments a couple of hours ago, Ryan. He was asked about this multiple times. He said that there will be lots of issues around that, his words, that I think will attract very serious questions if and when it happens. To Republicans, this is still very much a hypothetical. They have not received that memo from DOJ, for example, that Pam Bondi signed off on, saying that this is all kosher. They don't have any legitimate documents, conversations with the administration that tells them this is happening. And when the president, if he plans to use this during his term, he said that he would accept it. Will he use it after his term? Is it going to be parked at the presidential library? These are questions they need answers to first, because they don't even know if that clause you point out, the Emoluments Clause, even is applicable here. There's also a set of rules that DOD operates by, confidential rules by which they implement, by which a president, which vehicle he's allowed to use to transport himself on. Will this plane that Qatar is gifting Trump be actually equipped and retrofitted to serve as an Air Force One? They just don't know that either. So with all these questions lingering, I don't think Republicans are going to put the cart before the horse and stand up to the president here. But surely, if you're listening to Thune, it sounds like they do have serious concerns about this.
Okay, Julie, thank you for that. Let's bring Dan into the conversation now. Dan, there's obviously a lot of issues about this in terms of conflict of interest, the potential of the Qatari government maybe not being the most faithful actor when it comes to this. But there's also just a logistics issue, right, with taking a plane like this and making it Air Force One. I want to play something that Senator Coons told me yesterday about what this would look like. Take a listen.
Would we let another country decorate the Oval Office? Would we let another country build the Situation Room? Would we let another country wire the press office? Oh, wait. Air Force One is all three. Why on earth is it a good idea from a national security perspective to let another country, let alone the emir of another country, give President Trump his next Air Force One?
I feel like even kindergartners understand how many security protocols and specifications are put into Air Force One to allow the president to fly on it. I mean, what would it take to convert a jet like this?
This is a huge undertaking, right? Okay, so you have to, because it's from a foreign country, even though it's Boeing made, experts tell us that you would have to actually disassemble the plane to make sure there are no listening devices, spyware, any kind of vulnerabilities for security purposes. Then you've got to reassemble it, and then you've got to upgrade it and turn it into an Air Force One. Air Force One is not the jet that we take home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? This is a very sophisticated, complicated aircraft with communication systems, missile defense systems, backup power, right? I mean, the list is endless, and it's really elaborate. No other country has a plane like it, really. And so it costs hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to do this. And by the way, Boeing already has a contract to take two 747s and turn them into Air Force One aircraft. They've been doing that since 2018. It's supposed to cost about $3.9 billion. The cost is going up, and the delays keep happening. So the question is, how does this make any practical or logistical sense, financial sense, setting aside these questions about corruption and so on?
And that's part of Donald Trump's frustration, right? Because he thought that he'd have these brand new airplanes to fly on by the time his next administration rolled around. They haven't come yet, and he's frustrated by those delays. But if you move this new project in front of the list, couldn't that complicate getting those Air Force Ones that have already been in production up and ready to fly?
Yes, right. So that contract is there. It's a fixed cost contract. So Boeing is eating a lot of those cost overruns. It's not, they've regretted it. They've publicly said that, right? Now, Boeing made these 747s, so presumably Boeing would probably get the contract to do this. Okay? So maybe they make up some of the costs they've lost. But yes, it's not even clear that this Qatari jet would be ready by the end of this term. And then he wants it for his presidential museum, and you've got to disassemble the plane again. So there are so many practical questions. And then, yes, there's all these intelligence security concerns.
Yeah, it seems like this is a long way away from being an actual thing that happens. Dan DeLuce, thank you for breaking it down for us. We appreciate it. And as we mentioned, one of the potential business entanglements looming over the president's Middle East trip is his growing crypto dealings and the launch of his own meme coin just days before his inauguration. My colleague Kristen Welker pressed the president about his crypto business in her exclusive interview earlier this month. President Trump denied that he was using crypto to profit off the presidency, saying he hasn't even looked at how much his crypto was worth. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard has more on what we know and, more importantly, what we don't know about the president's crypto ventures.
Ryan, of all of his business ventures, it is the crypto ones that are so secretive. This is effectively dark money that is going straight into his bank account. He didn't divest from the Trump organization, and he is openly promoting investment into these Trump crypto coins, the stable coin, the Trump meme coin, the World Liberty Financial, which is this crypto entity that has in total brought in at least $600, we believe, into the accounts of Trump, his family, and their co-partners. This is a major money-making venture, and it's all coming from accounts that are secretive. not only Americans, but also foreign entities and individuals who are able to invest without having to reveal their identities. And Trump is openly promoting a gala on May 22nd at his Trump National Golf Course in Virginia, in which the top 220 investors in his Trump meme coin are going to be able to have dinner with him. They announced just this week those 220 individuals. Again, the public doesn't know the names of them because these are secret identities, but they have requested the identities so that they can bring people to these behind closed doors dinner. The top 25 investors, the top of which has value worth of $18 million in these Trump meme coins, are going to have a, quote, VIP tour. This is a serious question mark in terms of a conflict of interest and corruption concerns that we have never seen to this extent with any president of the United States previously. And just 2 weeks ago, as ahead of the president's current Middle East trip, his own son, Eric Trump, was on the stage at a major crypto conference in Dubai, announcing that the UAE was investing $2 billion worth of Trump stablecoins to close a deal with Binance, a major crypto firm. This is, for the Trumps, a major money-making effort here, and one that Democrats particularly have been very vocal about in their concerns, that this is direct money-making profit scheme by the President of the United States with a lack of transparency about who is giving money to him and his family through this, right?
Okay, thank you, Vaughn.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.